The final duality or contrast I wanted to talk about, and again, this was not overt, right? I mean, with so much in your life, it sort of is there, somewhere below the surface in the book, is you were happy to fit in some ways, and there was no overt feminism to your career progress. You write saying, I wasn't upset when I was excluded from the customs of male power. I was just happy to be included at all. This is right in the beginning of your book.
Yep.
I found that very, very interesting that there was no big push saying, hey, world, make way for me.
I have so many priorities, like I said, husband, family, parents, everybody to worry about. The last thing on my mind was going for golf outings. I don't play golf, so why should I go to golf outing? I don't drink, so what's the point going to a bar and hanging out? I don't eat meat, so going out to restaurants and watching other people eat while I pick at the sides is not my cup of tea. And I have kids at home. I want to spend time with them. So I said, you know what? You guys go do your weekend stuff, evening stuff. If you're doing 10, I might get involved in 1 for a short time, and then I'm going home. And to be honest, I was comfortable with that. And the reason I was comfortable is because the bosses I worked for, I had so much confidence in them, and they had so much confidence in me, that I was confident that they would not take a decision or agree to do something without my input. So I didn't have to go to that social outing or a weekend fishing to be part of the inner circle. So my point is, hey, do whatever you want. At the end of the day, you still have to come to me to make this a reality. So go enjoy yourselves. I'm going to stay with my kids.
All right. How would you describe your leadership style? Especially, I think once in the PepsiCo years, as you call it in your book, you worked with Roger Enrico. He did big things, big changes, as you pointed out in the book. Steve, who you pointed out yourself, was more frugal in his approach, more attention to detail. What was your style? How would you articulate it? I have some thoughts on it, but I'd like to hear from you first on this.
So I'll talk about professionally and personally, because 2 different things.
Sure.
I had, as people have told me, I have this ability to zoom out and zoom in. That was really what I was good at. In the sense of, I could take any issue and look at it at 30, 40, 50,000 feet and strategically reposition whatever I had to. But then I'd quickly zoom in and say, how do we implement it? What are the nitty-gritty details to implement it? And then I'd zoom out again. So I was like a telephoto lens, zooming in and zooming out. I would read everything put in front of me. Not because I mistrusted my people. It's out of respect for them. That if they prepared it, I should read it. And I would deeply understand a topic before I'd step back and say, okay, what does this mean? So I was an informed leader. I was not just a leader warming a chair. I was a leader who wanted to know what I was doing. So that's the first thing on the professional side. On my management style itself, I set stretch goals for people, but I helped them jump to those stretch goals. So I coached them, mentored them, I chided them when things didn't go well, but I told them what they did wrong in the back, but then in public, I always taught them how to cross difficult hurdles. The amount of time I spent on mentoring and coaching is just staggering. To me, the best example is when people leave PepsiCo and they go on to be CEOs of other companies. Many people have told me this. When they're faced with a difficult problem, they'll always sit back and say, what would Indra have done in this situation? How would she have thought about this? And I was talking to a board member I was talking to a CEO of a company in the US, and one of my board members is on his board. And he said that this board member, at every board meeting when they're in a difficult spot, this board member says, let's step back. Let me channel Indra. Let me see how she would approach this topic. Now, that was a pleasant surprise to me, but I've taught people how to think. I've taught people the zooming in and zooming out. I've taught people to say that no problem cannot be rethought and reconceptualized to get to a solution. So I gave people the tools to be an effective leader. And so they went on to bigger and better things. And that's why in my tenure, I produced more CEOs, more CHROs, CFOs, CMOs for the rest of corporate America than anybody else.
Where did you draw this style from? It's very non-textbook. You were also, I mean, at one point you almost took a job with GE. This was the Jack Welch era, Neutron Jack. Your style was very, very different. And I'll go on to illustrate how it was very different in subsequent examples. But where did you draw your style from?
I don't know, Menaka. I think in many ways, I just evolved it. I wondered whether I read a book or whether I saw somebody else in action. I didn't look at my people as tools of the trade. I looked at them as assets. Big difference. I felt that when they came into work, they didn't leave themselves at the door and come in to be a tool of the trade. I viewed them as people with families, communities, problems, joys, all that they bring to the workplace. I had to treat each person holistically. I had to get the best out of them by relating to them head, heart, and hands. So I realized that to build loyalty, to get the best out of people, I needed to engage them in a completely different way than anybody had been engaged. In a way, I wanted to engage them the way I was engaged by my CEOs that I worked for, by my mentors that I worked for. But interestingly, they did it for me, and I'm not sure they did it for many others. Mm. And so I thought I was the product of that great mentoring, that great support structure by my bosses. I wanted to be the same for all the people that worked with me in the top 2 or 3 levels of the company. So wherever I had the opportunity, I did that.
Ms. Nooyi, you brought a feminine side to this leadership. I use the word feminine loosely because I just don't know how else to describe it. And I'm not trying to box you or box women leaders into any kind of stereotype. But I found it interesting, and I wanted to know how you thought through this, the kind of pushback you saw, and how you reacted to that pushback. I'll tell you, for instance, when you talk about, the biggest transformation you made at Pepsi was the performance with purpose goal. That was your opus, you write. And there were 3 imperatives: nourish, replenish, and then cherish. And you do write in the book about how cherish raised a lot of eyebrows, right? There was also the other thing that you wrote about, which caught my attention, that you wrote to the parents of many of your senior team members at PepsiCo, thanking them for the gift of their child. This is not something common to leaders. This is not textbook stuff. In fact, I don't even know how many male leaders would consider that as a sign of strength or superiority, or think that it's antithetical to all of what leadership stands for, right? The third bit, and you say this, that there were points when you were dejected with people's response to your ideas, and you would go into the bathroom attached to your office and cry it out. Again, I don't know how many people would admit to that in a book. So I'd love to hear what went through your mind when you used cherish, for instance, or more importantly, how you fought the pushback.
So nourish and replenish were easy. Okay, easy to take those 2 words. On the people side, I truly wanted to have each person looked at as an individual and their contributions to the company. I didn't want them to be looked at as employees or associates. And that's why I carefully picked the word cherish. Now, people thought, God, that's such a girly word. I said, tough. You got a girly president. I'm a woman. I'm the CEO. It's going to be cherish. If you don't like it, suck it up. We're going to use the word cherish. Okay? So you can't just be fazed by these labels that they give you. You've got to do your agenda. So it's interesting. The very men who might have wondered, what am I doing writing to the parents, are the very men who loved it when their mothers or fathers got a letter and showed emotion. They would come to the office totally emotional and say, I cannot believe the reaction I got from my mother or my father. My parents are just over the moon. They said, since you were 18, we've never had a report card on you. And now we have this, we can show the whole world how wonderful our son or daughter is. The very men who sort of wondered what I was doing in writing to parents are the very people who love it when they get a positive note about their kids from their workplace. The very men who are now writing to the parents of their own employees saying, thank you for the gift of your child. And so I think it's just that we have all, as leaders, corporate leaders, decided that we should be objective, we should be emotionless, we should treat the workplace like a bunch of robots working in the workplace, work them to the bone, send them out, oil them now and then, replace parts, but treat everybody like a robot. I'm saying, no, I have people with a head, with a heart, with hands. All three are going to work together. And I'm going to oil all three. I'm going to worry about overworking any one part. I'm going to make sure that all three are in good working order. And that means a whole different way of engaging with people.
So you were the first immigrant CEO of Pepsi, the first non-white male CEO of Pepsi, the first Asian woman CEO of Pepsi. And yet you didn't feel the pressure to conform. You did this in your own style, in your own way, girly or not girly, crying or not crying, human or not human. There must have been pushback. I want you to, can you talk us through, were there points where you doubted yourself and said, no, maybe I should be different. Maybe I should be more white male CEO. Or how did you come to the point where you didn't really care as much about the pushback and said, no, I'm going to persist with my agenda? Where did that strength come from? Actually, that's my question. Where did that strength come from?
If somebody told me I had to conform, I don't know what to do differently. Am I going to change the way I look? No, I look in the mirror, I know exactly who I am. Am I going to dress differently? I was already dressing differently. Was I going to dress even more differently? No, because I am who I am. The clothes fit on me a certain way. I live life a certain way. I have a husband of Indian origin. We are happy in our skin. So I look at us and go, we are a product of our upbringing. We are a product of our culture, our civilization. That's who we are. I'm now working to reposition a company to make it even better than the way it was handed to me. And it was in very good shape when it came to me. My job is to make it even better. That's a lot of work by itself. Do I want to add more layers of complexity and say, now I'm going to remake myself. I'm going to create a new persona for Indra Nooyi. I'm going to start drinking, smoking, eating meat. Forget it. It's not worth it. And if you now start talking funny because you're trying to create a persona for yourself, that's more effort. So I decided I'm just going to be true to myself. I'm going to remain who I am. There's going to be no change. But I'm going to work at my job such that I was working for the future success of PepsiCo. Not for the future success of Indra Nooyi, future success of PepsiCo. And if that resulted in credit to Indra Nooyi, that's fine. But my singular job was to future-proof this company and make sure that the legacy I left behind was a good one. Great successor, well-run company, positioned right for the future. That's all I was interested in doing. I thought I would be judged after I left, not just when I was there.
Well, you were judged when you were in the job. And again, there's another sort of almost candid confession in the book that surprised me. It surprised me that you included in the book. You could have very easily left it out and nobody would have queried you about it, which is this whole battle with the attire. Why did you keep it in the book?
With the outfit? Because I think that...
with clothing, attire, it seemed to bother you enough for you to write about it. And yet you didn't seem to think of it as hey, this was a point of weakness. Maybe I should not discuss it so openly, right? You're candid about it.
It's a mentorship in action. I think that's the way I look at it. I was wearing clothes that, long skirts that came up to the ankle. I look at some of the videos and photographs of me from those days. Oh God, it was quite interesting. Nobody gave me dressing tips. I just did what I was comfortable with. But then why did Gordon come to me? Why did Gordon take the effort to do whatever he did, to take me to Saks and suggest that I get a new wardrobe and dress the part. There's something that he saw in me that he thought he could help with. The fact that he took the pain to do that, I was touched. And then I realized that it gave me newfound confidence. It's interesting, when you dress the part, it gives you newfound confidence. I wasn't changing things about me. I just got a little bit more stylish clothes, and I wore some pearls and put on nice scarves. But it was my brand of dressing that he created for me. He didn't make me dress like somebody else. He evolved a new style of dressing for me. I was known for my scarves, for my pearls. I was known for that. He dressed me that way. And I'll be honest with you, I'm talking about listening to other people's input. How do you build confidence yourself? By using input from well-meaning people. I could have rejected it, but I chose to take it. And at the end of the day, as you evolve in a job or in your life, different people are going to give you advice. Take it selectively. Use it to your advantage and make sure that it makes you a better person or gives you more advantages going forward, doesn't take you back. If he had come and said, why don't you get a tattoo and spike your hair? Okay, that's a different ballgame. Okay, I would have said, forget it, I'm not doing it. He could have said, wear leather jackets and be a little cooler. He didn't do that. He evolved my personality in the same conservative frame that I had, just upgraded it a bit. And I thought that gave me more tailwinds, which I could have used at that time because I was dealing with a lot of issues globally. So selectively you have to decide what advice to take and what not to take. And I thought there was a very important moment in my life when somebody who I didn't know at all had the courage to come talk to me. And I don't know what caused me to talk to him. And the fact that I accompanied him to Saks in New York and actually went through the process, that's a lot of courage in him and in me. And then the coming together.
It must have been bothering you. It must have been bothering you. Otherwise, you would have probably, because it's like you said, you didn't conform for any of the other things. No golf club membership, no weekend retreats for management. And yet this, maybe the criticism around attire bothered you enough, because the backstory to Gordon is not in the book. You've just mentioned that you meet him, he comes to you, he volunteers this, help with a makeover, and you take him up on it.
I'm telling you something, he was a contract designer for Gatorade. I mean, he was working on Gatorade, and a Gatorade review meeting, a couple of them, he saw me. And he asked the Gatorade people whether he could talk to me privately. So there is no backstory on Gordon. He had a job as a designer in Gatorade. So this was somebody doing it out of the goodness of his heart, which is what I don't understand, why people have that much goodness in their heart. He did it out of goodness in his heart. It didn't bother me as much, Menaka, except that I look at my skirts, which are completely shapeless. I look at my jacket, which were just too big and hung on me. And at times I'd say, God, I'm going to have to overcome with the thoughts I have and the comments I'm going to make to overcome these. It's a pretty interesting appearance I have. It was quite an interesting appearance. And I think that dressing the part a bit more actually gave me even more confidence. I have to tell you, it did.
Yeah. Ms. Nooyi, I never actually ever registered your dressing till you wrote about it in the book, and then I went back and looked at some of your pictures.
And you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not in your shoes. I never will be. I don't know what it's like to lead such a large organization and have the focus shifted away from a great strategy to what jacket is she wearing. And I'm sure if you could fix that, then it was just easier to fix that than have the focus taken away from the other good work you were doing, right? Yeah. So I get why you fixed it. I'm sure I was surprised at the candor by including it in the book. Not too many people would have ever conceded to something like that. So I thought that was very, very interesting. What was there? There were individual mentors. I know at every point in time through your jobs, whether at ABB or Motorola before that, or even at PepsiCo. But within contemporaries, anyone that you looked up to, or anybody who you thought whose management style or leadership style or strategic thinking was outstanding. You do talk about a conversation with Steve Jobs that provoked your thoughts on design. Anybody else?
I read and watch what a lot of CEOs do. I watch them on tape. I watch them in earnings release. I watch them in investor meetings. So it's not that I draw lessons from one person. I actually look at different people in different situations, because I think it's not what they do day to day. It's what they do in extraordinary times that teaches you lessons, teaches you new ways of approaching issues. So I watch all of these tapes all the time. I read everything I can about my contemporaries. We also do on, business roundtable or the Fed boards together. So we all interact and talk to each other. And we had this little kitchen cabinet of 5 CEOs that we would all meet and talk about issues. So it's not that we didn't have support structures. We all created our own support structures to talk to each other and be our own kitchen cabinet. I think that at the end of the day, different people will call you and say, hey, you're facing an activist. Let me give you some suggestions how you might want to approach this person. I remember Larry Fink, who's head of BlackRock, who has never, ever endorsed a CEO strategy publicly when they were in the middle of an activist fight. When an activist entered PepsiCo stock, Larry Fink went on TV and said, I endorse the strategy of Indra Nooyi and PepsiCo. He didn't have to do that, but he did it. Everybody was surprised. Everybody in the industry was surprised because Larry Fink is such a big figure. My board, I was surprised. And I called Larry Fink and said, wow, thanks, Larry. His point is, I fully endorse your strategy and direction. Just keep going. And then he invited me to address his senior management meeting. And I still remember that day, Larry had major tooth surgery. And in spite of that, he came and moderated the discussion with me with all that pain, because he felt it was important that he gave me the explicit support so I could keep doing what I was doing. It was truly, sometimes you luck out. I lucked out on these people who stepped out and put their reputation on the line to support me. And this is where I think sometimes I just say thank you to God for giving me these opportunities and these people in my life, because without them, I'm not sure I could have been successful.
You don't write much about Nelson Peltz in the book. There's barely a page and a half. You make a reference to activist funds or activist investors. It's not very flattering. If I can quote you from the book, you say activist funds pursued companies with decent cash flow where they thought they could perturb the CEO enough to do their bidding, right? That's how you put it in the book. It was a long, ugly fight, but you've devoted barely a page and a half to it. Why is that?
Because in my 25-year career at PepsiCo, if I took the time that the activist had any call on my time, it was less than a page and a half equivalent. But I just talked about the journey of being with an activist. Although I have to tell you, I like Nelson Peltz. He's a friend of mine, and we still remain friends. Long after he's gone from my stock, he was a friend for many years. Before he came into my stock, he remains a friend after. So, when activists come, you can't immediately say they're bad people. You have to listen to what they have to say, because that's free consulting. But just don't do what they're saying if you think it's not right for the company. That's the way I approached it. Through my entire interaction with first Ralph Whitworth and then Nelson Peltz, I remained cordial, respectful, and made sure that they knew that I was listening to every one of their ideas, studying them carefully. And if I didn't agree with it, I told them that. Because I said to them, I'm running the company for the duration of the company, not for the short term. And so, Nelson had a theory which, was a perfectly plausible theory. But it was not a better theory than what the theory was that we were operating under. So at the end of the day, I have to know whether what we are doing is the right thing or not, which is what I was focused on.
As you look back, Ms. Nooyi, now with the benefit of hindsight, any failures? Because the book doesn't necessarily talk about any specific failures, right? And it's not necessarily an area that business leaders are often very candid about, but it is an area that's important to talk about because nobody's life is only marked with success. what would you identify as some of maybe the biggest failures in whatever scale or size, given the sort of the breadth of your career? Some of the biggest
I think
failures that you would have witnessed.
the one that I think about a lot is Pepsi Refresh. I think in 2007 or 8, instead of advertising for millions of dollars in the Super Bowl, because we're in the middle of the financial crisis, I agreed with the Pepsi team that they came with a plan where they were going to take 20 or 30% of the Super Bowl advertising money and then the annual marketing budget and do a different sort of advertising for Pepsi. They were going to call this refreshing every community. So communities would suggest ideas for little projects, $50,000, $25,000, $10,000, $5,000 grants to improve the community. The community would vote to decide who should be at the top of the list, and then the public would vote to see who should get the grants. I thought it was a fantastic marketing program. I approved it, and we did it for a few months, a year, almost a year. But then people said, your job is to advertise Pepsi, not to improve communities. And I thought when we were in the middle of the financial crisis, this was the best way to show that Pepsi cared. But many people felt that putting money behind the brand, showing shots of people drinking the brand, showing the joy of Pepsi was the way to go. At that time, for unconnected reasons, we lost 0.2 of a point of share. People were up in arms about it. So I said, you know what? If it's really such an irksome thing for people, let me go back to the core of Pepsi. I killed Pepsi Refresh. I tell you something, for a long time, even today, I regret that I pulled Pepsi Refresh because it was an unbelievable, community-oriented campaign.
That was the worst thing you did in 25 years?
I mean, it's not the worst thing. The worst thing that happened to me in terms of a bad decision.
Correct. In terms of a bad decision or a bad strategy or tactic.
There were many like that, many like that, that over time you buy a company, you don't integrate it well, you run into issues, you have to start over again. Or you buy a company and you were going to take it up to $700 million in 5 years, it only reaches $300 million. That's a failure in my books. There are a lot of those examples, but those happen behind the scenes and we make it up through other ways. A product is launched with great fanfare, we think it's going to do great. In 3 months, you pull it because the consumer says, don't like it. The cost of failure in our business is low when you launch a product, but there were many of those, many of those. Around the world, there were many of those.
What do you think has changed?
You learn from those failures. You learn from the failures, and then you go back and retool your process so that you can study the issue a little bit more before you launch something. But you learn from failures.
Okay. You're still actively, involved in corporate America, if I may say so, because of your positions on various boards. What do you think has changed in leadership, in management, in the way your generation approached it, in the way leaders today need to approach it, in what CEOs need to bring to the table today?
I think that CEOs are now beginning to realize that to have a great workforce, they've got to be a very inclusive workforce. Diversity has to be in the front burner. And they now realize that bringing women in, bringing people of different backgrounds in, makes for better decisions, makes for a better corporate environment. And they're beginning to think about the support systems to give young family builders and people of different ethnicities to be able to come to work and have families. So that's a great point for progress. Second is, everybody's talking about issues related to unconscious bias that exists in corporations. And people are working to actively identify and remove them, not by shaming people, but more about providing examples of how life could be better, where we not to have incidents of unconscious bias. So I think sensitivity levels have gone up. The economic argument is much more explicit, and you're beginning to see meaningful corporate action. Finally, I think women themselves have brought the lack of women representation in senior positions They've brought it to the attention of everybody. A lot of people are talking about it. Organizations like Catalyst, Melinda Gates, Bezos, McKinsey, Scott. All of these people are beginning to talk about it. So you're getting powerful people talking about it, corporate leaders beginning to do something about it, and a whole economic argument wrapped around it. You put that all together, I would say that change is coming. It's been slow in coming, but now it's picking up speed. So I think that's why there are more women CEOs in the marketplace today. More people are being appointed to CEO positions. I think you'll see a lot more of that. We even have a female vice president of the United States.